That we're going in the right direction, based on all of our conversations here throughout the season, and particularly at the end of the season. I know our record certainly wasn't what anybody wanted it to be. I know the last 5-6 weeks have been difficult with all the changes we made, but certainly feel good about some of the foundation we set moving forward here. And it's been a tough stretch here the last 4 years, and we knew the situation we were in, and like I've said numerous times, this season and the last few have been a byproduct of having a lot of success. That's what happens in pro sports, but we've got the right people in place here to help us accelerate this process, meaning some of the players in this locker room, and I feel really good about our future.
You are somebody who says your record is what you are twice a week.
Yes.
So the franchise just had its worst record in like 25 years.
Yeah.
So why do you feel the way that you feel?
Well, as we've touched on a lot, your record is what it is. We weren't far off in 60 of the game, however many games that we lost, and there's a lot of data and, stuff that we do behind the scenes here that thinks, Jesus, we should have won that, just from a pure 60-minute data of where your play was, your scoring chances, things that matter in our game, say that our record should have been better. And obviously it's hard because the last 6 weeks are a little bit misleading because of the changes and whatnot. And I think we all, and I've talked about this with our players, we kind of have to not forget, but really focus on the first, probably through the middle of January before we started making changes, what that looked like when we weren't auditioning players and doing the things we were doing. That's just the fact. And there were a lot of things that a play here, a play there, and we're in a different situation where if you look at some of the other teams maybe that are in the lottery or around us in the standings, it didn't look that way. So that's why I'm optimistic. And, some of those other teams don't have Carlson, Couture, Hurdle, Vlasic, Ferraro, guys like that are great building blocks.
But of course the question is, will you have Carlson next year?
I sure the hell hope so. Obviously there's all that type of speculation, and he's here till he's not. This is pro sports, and after every season you could go to any locker room and reporters are probably asking the coach and the general manager if this guy will be here or not. And Wayne Gretzky got traded. Anybody can get traded. But listen, he's, from a coaching standpoint, he's everything you want in a player, and he was incredible in the locker room. He's great to coach, and I hope he goes nowhere.
Did Mark Edward Vlasic campaign to play with him next year with you as much as he did with us?
Did you hear about the +1? Yeah, okay.
That +1 game for the season is a
There's a real reach wanting to play with a 100-point defenseman, huh?
But in all seriousness, though, there are other statistics that suggest that he had his best year in several years. And, last year, we were just talking about, one of the first questions to him was, do you think you're going to get bought out? Has he done more over the course of this year to sort of solidify his place?
Well, from my end of it, and you take a job and you hear all these things about players, right? You're asking, and from day one, I don't know if I've enjoyed being around someone more than him. He's been a great teammate. He's been very coachable. He's been a pro. He's worked hard, defended well. This guy still has good hockey left in him, and that's not necessarily what you were hearing, last year and the year before and the year before. So, I've been really happy with him, and I thought he had a really good year.
What does this organization, what does this team need to improve the most, in your opinion?
Like I just said, you think about our last 6 weeks, and you think about all the things we need to improve, and then you think, okay, when we had everybody and what we're looking for, we've got to get our pucks out. I think our deep things on the back end, moving pucks quicker and better, being more efficient in our breakouts, execution on our breakouts, and puck play from our D-core has to improve dramatically. I think our grit and compete has to improve. Pushback, and I don't mean fighting, just more pushback. We have to have more pushback. That's, those are things that we need to improve on for sure.
When you were with the Rangers, was there an ability to sort of, and I know that the circumstances are not quite the same, but an ability to more hit the ground running in the second training camp? Guys
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I think it's always easier the second year when there's a change. I just look back at, my career, and the second year has always been better, much better, markedly better, whether it be in Lake Erie or BU or even with the Rangers. You know, my 3 head coaching stops. The second year, you know, my second year at BU, we played for the national championship. My second year with the Rangers, we were 1 point out of a playoff spot when the pandemic hit. Lake Erie made the playoffs my second year. They had made the playoffs in 11 years, so it's a lot easier the second year when you take over a situation that, you know, was similar to ours. Both those situations were tough situations when I went into them. And the second year, it's easier. I shouldn't say it's easier. It's just, you know, you just have had more time with the people that you're coaching, and there's a way of going about and things that everybody understands, and you know, it's just the way it's been.
One thing Eric Carlson mentioned is, you know, he hopes the prospect pool is going to get a little bit deeper. What did you see from the Jacob Petersons, the William Eklunds, and the Bordelos this season, and the looks you got from them?
Growth on all 3 of those guys. I thought Bordy's game, the last game, was his best game, but since being called up. I liked all of Eklund's games for the most part while he was here, and you know, Peterson, from my end of it, was a pleasant surprise. I mean, he did a good job, and then Thrun stepped in and really played well. So, you know, I think Mike's done a really good job in a short time improving our talent pool and our depth with prospects, and I fully anticipate that's going to continue to grow.
Not limited to those guys, but just they're the first off the top of the head, Peterson, Thrun, maybe Gregor. You know, are those guys that younger guys that have a head start maybe for next year, just in terms of just you know, obviously they need to have good summers and all that stuff, but just they showed enough there at the end there that they maybe, you know, they're a little bit ahead on the depth chart to start.
Yeah, for sure. They've certainly, well, now that there's a familiarity from my end, and you know, Greggy had a much better second half of the season. His last 2 months were good, and you know, he and I've talked about handling adversity, and I thought he did a much better job the last 2 months. He was, you know, he's the player that I think we all know he's capable of being. But you know, as I always jokingly say, God, someday I hope you think you're as good as I think you are, and I may not see that. The coach had scratched you 20 plus times this year, but that's part of growing as a player. And you know, those guys, obviously, their performance this year puts them in a different situation when next year starts.
I ask you particularly about Noah, just because there has been a lot of you know, just talk with him, communication, that sort of thing, right? Just is he somebody that has put forward now that when you talk with Mike, maybe, not to put you on the spot, but
right,
you know, you want him back? You know?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's funny. He and I talked. I know we went through that earlier. You know, probably a couple months ago about communication, and ironically, the day you guys had talked to him, he and I had talked right after, not even knowing that was and you know, we kind of had it's been a couple weeks where I hadn't talked to him, and sometimes, you know, you talk to a player and then. And sometimes they got to figure it out on their own. You can't hold their hand through everything. So sometimes stepping away and not talking to them, you're trying to get them to figure it out on their own. So, you know, I actually joked a little bit about that after we talked, because the next day, you know, you hear about, gee, he was complaining about communication, and he came in, he goes, by the way, he goes, you know, they asked me about it. I told them I hadn't talked to you in a couple of weeks, and so I said, then right after that, you and I talk. So, you know, but he's a good kid and a good player.
Is there, go ahead. I was going to say, I mean, there's a lot of, you know, speculation about Eric's future, but maybe some speculation about Kevin Labank's future here too. How did you feel about the way he ended the season, as far as where his game was at?
You know, he and I just talked. We just met, and you know, he and I both agree it was a very inconsistent season for him. You know, there were stretches that I really liked, and there were stretches I didn't like. And he knows. The good news, he and I are on the same page on what he needs to do to be the player we all think he's capable of being. And I don't want to get into specifics, but it was a tough year for him away from the rink for a variety of reasons, and he knows I'm aware of that, and I'm certainly sympathetic to that.
When we were here last year, there was like this big theme, like 8 guys said, we just need to find like 40 more goals. Like the whole team had like stopped enough, it was just find a little more offense. I think you ended up scoring like 20 more goals. Obviously the other number is way
too high.
How much of that, whenever you try to break down where all that came from, is last year there were 2 goalies that their save percentage started with 91, and this year they start with 89 or 88. Like,
listen, it is what it is. Those numbers are real, and that plays a role in it for sure. I mean, we all know that. Talking to both the goalies, they were frustrated with their play for stretches, and that is part of being a successful hockey team. And when you look at our team, you look at all 3 positions, and you got to evaluate them honestly, and our goaltending needs to be better, right? And I think these guys are good goalies. That doesn't mean you're looking to go out and change them. Our goaltending needs to be better. We need to defend better. We need to again, mid-January, we did a deep dive into our goals against, and the number one reason we were giving up goals is because of offensive zone turnovers, which turned into crazy odd man rushes. It wasn't plays at the offensive blue line. It wasn't crazy pinches and dives. It was our all O-zone turnovers that cost us. They accounted for about 35% of the scoring chances against. And our D-zone was the last reason why we were giving up scoring chances. So puck management and skill also play a factor into playing defense, because when you're turning pucks over, you're on offense, and all of a sudden you're going to play defense, and it's tough to get into structure when you're giving up turnovers, when you're turning pucks over. So skill plays a role in it.
Does playing a more aggressive style, though, maybe put more pressure on the goalies or more stress on the goalies to make saves?
Not if it's in the O-zone. There is a balancing act for sure, and we're going to look at some of the things we do, maybe a little bit structurally, to maybe alleviate it. But I'm a big believer in when you watch your team do something that you're asking them to do, and you do it right, what are the results? I'm not going to change something because we're asking them to do something, and they do it wrong, and you don't get the results, because that's not, if you're not executing what you're trying to do, yet you give up a scoring chance, it's not the systems that's wrong. So regardless of what we're teaching them, if they're not doing what we're asking them to do, I could change the system or whatnot, but you're still going to get the same results because there's a breakdown.
A number of players that we talked to today, I think Oscar stands out. Talk just about his confidence during the season. The other players, I think Noah also mentioned early in the season too for him that was an issue, and with the record as it was from the beginning of the season, was just that's just a big battle for a lot of the guys here. And who did you see, I guess, overcome that? I guess over time,
I think as a group we overcame it. I thought we were having confidence problems early on because of our record, but as we addressed it as the season go on, there's a way to become a more confident team, and that's watching everybody do things the right way. I mean, I guess I was a little surprised how poorly we practiced when the season started, and I thought that got better. And I've said this to you guys before, when I was a player and I didn't go in, when I wasn't up during practice, I'd stand in line and watch my teammates. And when I was watching them do things right, I felt better about our team. When I was watching them do things wrong, I didn't feel very good about our team. And that holds true to a player, too. You want to be a confident player, do things right. I become a confident sand player in my golf game when I go and practice, and I hit some good sand shots. And then when the round starts, I put one in the bunker, and I'm racing to the bunker. Well, if I haven't hit a good sand shot in 3 weeks, I don't want to go in the bunker. No different here.
Who are the players who maybe increased in their confidence or maturity the most during the season?
Let me see. I thought Lorentz probably made the biggest jump. I thought Lorentz's last 2 months were really good. I thought Vlasic's confidence continued to grow. Obviously, Carlson played at a whole new level. Sturmy, Peterson. I think there's a bunch of guys that played with more confidence as the season went on.
Tomas Hertl's going to be a big part of things here for the next several years. How does he kind of keep up? He's 30 years old next year. A guy like him, big guy, how does he sort of make him a maximum sort of impact on his team, I guess?
There's not a better human being playing in the National Hockey League than Thomas Hertl, and sometimes that's a problem because he wears everything on his sleeve, and when there's a mistake or he feels like he let someone down, it really weighs on him. It slows him down. So confidence is part of it with him. When he lets a bad play get in the way. I thought he was 38 the way everybody talks about. He's not even 30 yet. But he's got a lot of great hockey ahead of him. He and I talked today again. He was a little frustrated with his inconsistencies. He and I touched on the 2 areas he absolutely has to get better at. He knows it. He's going to work on it, and I think we're going to see a much more consistent player next year.
Speed, one of those things.
It's funny, and I talked to him about that. When you don't skate, you don't look fast, right? And I think he needs to skate more. I think he's a better skater than he gives himself credit for, and other people do too. There's a lot of times where he's not skating, so he looks slow. And he can skate. And I said that to him. I said, you don't give yourself enough credit because you don't skate enough. And that's an area that he's certainly going to be cognizant of this summer, and some of the things he's going to get better at.
His conditioning is okay? I mean, is that needed, is there another area that for him that?
He and I talked about that too. And, as the season gets going, this league, you either get in better shape in games or you don't. Because there's only so much practice time we have, and the more you skate in games, the better shape you get in as the season goes on. And that's something that he and I talked about as well.
How much would, I asked a few of the guys today just about the draft lottery and what it looks like a pretty good draft for this team, and how much that could give a jolt for this team. Is that something you think about too, as you kind of the weeks getting closer here, about what this team could look like in the fall with a player who's maybe NHL ready to come in?
Yes, I do think about that. And I'm going to think about it a lot until May 8th.
Is there a lucky charm for them?
I'm going to find one. So far, I've been unfortunate to be in the lottery twice, and it was the first and second pick when our odds were awful with the Rangers. So maybe we get a little bit of Irish luck there.
You mentioned.
Like looking at the first, whatever it was, till mid-January, there's one very big piece that's not here from then. And so, like, and not everyone's going to go up here and say, oh, we have to make the playoffs next year,
Yeah.
or everyone's getting fired. That's not
Right.
that thing here. But just how are you going to look at next year and say, this is what we need to do? This is what progress will look like for us?
Well, I think first you have to wait to see what the roster looks like. I mean, I don't know what, your expectations are always tied to what your roster looks like. And I always judge from a trade deadline standpoint. If you're really curious to where an organization is, pay attention to what they do at the trade deadline. In my 3 years in New York, we never added anybody. We either subtracted people or didn't add anybody. And this past year, we subtracted people. So that's an indication that we're in a situation where we're looking to get better. And, Mike's got some hard decisions to make moving forward here, as every general manager does when the season ends. But we'll have a lot clearer picture of what our goals are when the roster is complete.
We were just, Eric was talking about that earlier, saying the team will trade maybe gives some sort of indication as to what direction the team is going to go in, and maybe that if that makes him a little bit more open to a move elsewhere. I mean, does there have to be some sort of assurance to him or something, like just to say, what, we're going in a good direction here, and we think you're a big part of it? Is there a part of that involved in this?
Yeah, I didn't really talk. I wouldn't. If I answered that, I wouldn't be with the proper information. So that's something I'm sure him and Mike have talked about or are going to talk about. But when you do trade a player like Timo, you do create some cap space too. You're going to go out and get a Timo Meier for the amount of cap space we created. Maybe not, but you can get better in different ways too.
Just taking a step back, first season in San Jose, from the adjustment period, how did you feel the season went for you personally? It was your first year behind the bench for the Sharks.
Well, I'm very fortunate to have incredible assistant coaches. I mean, Scotty Gordon and Brian Wiseman and Ryan Wasowski and Tom Spears and even Cody and Nick with the video guys, they did a phenomenal job. And I think if you talk to these players, they feel really good about those guys. And so I'm just really fortunate to have assistant coaches like that. I was really happy with the job that they did, incredibly happy. They made my job a lot easier. Obviously, we're in the win-lose business, so you want to puke with the record that we had. But, I look back at some of the things maybe I would have done differently. I think every coach says, I wish I'd done this a little bit different and that a little bit different. But overall, I feel really good about the connection that we have as a staff with our team and in the direction we're going.
Kind of forget about him, but Marcus Nudavara, we only saw him in one game, preseason game. I mean, what happened to him, and how does it look for him sort of going forward as far as his career goes?
Yeah, I know he's still working on getting healthy, and it's really sad because he was a good player, and hopefully he can get back into this league, or, that's a tough situation, And then Luke Kunin, losing Kunin really hurt too. So not having those two guys hurt.
Did he ever, Marcus, he didn't have surgery? Was it just all
Yeah, just all. No, he did have a procedure, I think.
Okay.
That was we're talking months ago, so we'll lose track of who had what.
You mentioned, things you might have done differently. So what might you do?
I'm not going to tell you.
Well, let me rephrase then. Ask the same question, but in a different way. What did you learn, this year?
The travel's a Out in the West, I
Yeah.
did learn that.
You can't change that.
But big, you know, you're learning your players, really. At the end of the day, it's, as a coach, you're responsible to establish relationship with your players to put them in the best position to have success. And I thought over time we did that. And I think there's a real connection between the players and the coaches here after year one, and we have to build on that. It's our responsibility to build on that and put us in the best position to have success individually and collectively.
What do you tell Mario Ferraro about his year and just what he needs to kind of work on? Because he's, a big part of the team.
Yeah.
He's a younger,
Yeah.
student.
Mario and I talked a lot today. People lose track of the fact he's 24 years old, and there's been a lot thrown at him in a short period of time, and he's not immune to all the other challenges of a 24-year-old. And, the contract and different partners he had all year, he puts a lot of pressure on himself. And we don't have a more caring, competitive player than we do in Mario. And, he and I had a long conversation today as following up some of the conversations we had during the year of, just relaxing a little bit more and, not trying to do too much. He does it because he wants us to do so well. And I'd much rather have that than someone who's trying to do too much for their own individual reasons.
One thing Mario said is everybody in this room can be a leader. Is that something you get the feel for here?
Yeah, I touched on that with a bunch of guys today. I think that's, again, when you have so much newness, I think there is a feeling out process and guys understanding what they're capable of doing. And there's some players that I talked about taking another step from a leadership standpoint. Leadership can't just come from your captains and your assistant captains. Leadership has to run all throughout your locker room. And we have guys in here that are capable of being leaders that have to do a better job of it and take more responsibility on. And I think they will, after being here for a little bit longer and being in more familiar surroundings.
With Mario, is there you look at his ice time this year, I don't know, with 23, 24 minutes a game. Is that a good number for him, or in an ideal world, does that come down a little bit? Maybe that work a little bit spread out a bit?
Well, if it come down a little bit, then we have more depth. So, but he's capable of playing. He's in great shape. He, takes great care of himself. So I'm not worried about that number.
When, just looking at the division record, whatever it was, 4-14 and 8, I think is it was, or something like that. As this team kind of goes forward here, I know it's probably a better question for Mike, as far as building a roster that can, first of all, compete with this teams in this division as you try to, the teams you have to battle with to sort of, get into the playoffs. Is that part of this here, just to kind of look at who exactly you're competing against and building a team that can compete with that?
Yeah, I think that does play a role in it. But, when you think about it, we only played the Kings one more time than we played the Islanders or the Flyers or you know what I mean? Like, the way the league's drawn up, there's only 4 teams in your division. You play 4 times, right? So that, it really isn't heavily swayed to the division right now the way it is. But you do have to be a little more aware of your opponents within the division and do a way better job than whatever number you just relayed to me, which I tried not to pay attention to.
How's Oscar got to be better next year?
Well, a year under his belt here and more comfort and just being in a different environment. Another year under his belt after coming off what he's been through in his life.
What's the ceiling for him? Like, where can he? Yeah, you started him off, I think it was in the top 6, like in the second line this year, and obviously he finished this year, most of the year on the 4th line.
Yeah.
I mean, where's the ceiling for him?
Well, I think his ceiling can be a third-line guy, but he understands, what he needs to do to get there. More consistent, more confident with the puck. So,
You taking anybody to Latvia?
We're just starting to ask guys today over the last few days, so we'll see. I'm not the GM of that team either, so. I'm the coach, especially at that. That's way more out of my hands than this level.
Your staff, though, the guys that come with you?
Yeah, we're still putting the staff together. We haven't decided that yet, so.
You excited to go back and do that again?
Very much so, yeah. It's an unbelievable opportunity to represent your country and chance to win.
Are some of the star players, the star American players who aren't playing right now, have they been, I don't know if you got a chance to talk to them, or if that's more for the GM, but are they receptive to coming in? Like a guy like a Brady Tkachuk, for instance, I mean, is he?
Brady and I are going to have a conversation.
Yeah.
You'll put the personal press on it.
Maybe. That probably won't be enough, but we'll see.
It's gonna
I'll
be-
tell him his wedding gift will be a lot smaller if he doesn't come to Europe with me.
It's going to be similar to You're Coming to Be You.
Yes, exactly.
How's the rest of summer look for you after?
Gonna take a little time away, gonna building a house in Westerly, Rhode Island, make sure the construction people don't screw that up. Play a lot of golf, and already looking forward to next year.